So now we're going to start Daf Peches Amid Beis, and we're trying to move at a fast pace. Here's Rebbe's question. The two cases listed in the Mishnah which require a revius, mitzora, if it's the first of the two cases which are mitzora, chutzu, the entire process of purifying the mitzora took place outside of the azara. And therefore, you don't have to sanctify the water for that process of purifying the mitzvah. Ve'i nazir, and if the second possibility, I don't get it either, because the nazir already his revius was already sanctified. Why is that so? Because lechem nazir b'shchitas ayel hu dekadish. The lechamim of the Nazir, which accompany the ayil of a Nazir, were already sanctified with the shechita of the ayil. There's no reason or no necessity to measure out a quarter of a lug in a klisharis that was designated for liquids, because this sanctification was already clinched with the shechita of the ayil. Amalei Rabbi Chia, one of the outstanding Talmidim of Rebbe, stood up with an answer to Rebbe's question. Sheba hayamoded lechavite kohen gadol. The reason why we need this revius lug measuring utensil to be mekadesh is for the shemen of the chavite kohen gadol. Right, the chavite kohen gadol, which were brought twice a day, once in the morning, one in the afternoon, those menachos had to be accompanied with a revius lug of shemen, revius shemen l'chol chala v'chala. Now, the minchas chavitin of the kohen gadol on a daily basis were made up of 12 lechamim, 6 in the morning. Just one second, let me just get that straight. Right, and 6 in the afternoon. So you needed shemen for all 6 loaves of the morning and all 6 loaves of the afternoon. You needed a total for all 12 loaves. You needed 1.5 lugim of shemen. Now, if you divide 1.5 lugim of shemen by 6, you get to 1/4 lug of oil per loaf for each one of the loaves. So you multiply that by 6 and you get 1.5. And Rebbe was so impressed, and this we're going to see over and over again as a pattern, that he would quote a pasuk to sort of complement that, in this case, Rabbi Chia. And he said, Kari Allah, because Rabbi Chia came all the way from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, and quoting the pasuk here in Yeshaya Novi that says, Me'erech merchak ish atzasi. The man of my counsel came from a distant land. Now we go on. The Mishnah says, so we already covered the revius log. Now we're up to the chatzi log. Chatzi log mishamesh. What was the purpose? And we said it was for the sota and for the lachmei toda. Yosef Rebbe v'kokashali. I don't get it, says Rebbe. Chatzi log lama nimshach. I don't need to sanctify this measure of a chatzi log of liquid with shemen hamishcha. I don't need it. Why? Because sota, and once again, the mayim, I should say, the mei sota is chechulinu d'trichi l'kedushay. Do we need to sanctify these waters that were used for the concoction of a sota? They've already been sanctified. How do I know this? Because the pasuk says mayim kedoshim, which means Mayim Kedoshim is a reference to the Mei Kior, right? There was a Kior in the Mikdash, and all the Mayim in the Kior was sanctified through the Kior. The Kior was a Kli Shares. And already this Mayim that was taken from the Kior for the Sota was already sanctified. I didn't need to sanctify it a second time around through the Kli that was used for a Chatzi Log. And Ilitoda, and once again, this is very parallel to what we saw in Nazir, is Lach Meitod Shchitas Toda Hudakot. The Shchita of the Korban Toda is Makadesh the Lechamim. So there's no need to be Makadesh the Chatzi Log Shemen, because Chatzi Log Shemen was mixed together with the flour, and the Shchita of the Korban Toda would be Makadesh the loaves that accompanied the Toda. Now, Rebbe's son, Rabbi Shimon, stands up and answers Rebbe's question. Amalei Rabbi Shimon Rebbe, Rabbi Shimon the son of Rebbe. Shebo Hoya, why do we need this Chatzi Log liquid measure to be sanctified in with Shemen HaMishcha? Hoya Machalik Chatzi Log Shemen L'chol never there. We need it for the oil that was used in the menorah. And it was a chatzi log for each ner. Remember, we needed a total of 3.5 logim of shemen for the menorah. Divided by 7, it was chatzi log for each ner. And that chatzi log did not have a previous kiddush. It wasn't sanctified. It didn't come from the kiyar. It wasn't sanctified through the shechita of any karman. So it had to be sanctified when it was measured out in this kli shares for a chatzi log. Amalo, Rebbe was so impressed by his son, and therefore he called him Ner Yisrael, Kachav, meaning you're the light of Israel. Probably uses the word light here to refer to the shemen of the menorah. He says, light of Israel, one who enlightens the eyes of the Chachmei Yisrael. Okay. I got to remind my brother, because he learned in a yeshiva called Ner Yisrael. Okay. Anyway, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rebbe. Okay, this is a little bit of a separate section regarding the menorah in the Mikdash, because the menorah is not really the center topic of our Mishnah. But once we mention the menorah in order to mekadesh the Chatzi Log, so we're going to talk about the following. What the amount of shemen that was put in each lamp, which we said was a Chatzi Log, would suffice to carry the light through the night. But on occasion, it blew out in the middle of the night. Omer Rabbi Yochanan Omer Rebbe, Ner shekovsa, if the light of the menorah went out in the middle of the day, it didn't last until sunrise, so it was extinguished prematurely. And we're going to learn this sugya based on Rashi. And remind me, I want to mention the Rashba as a whole different approach to the sugya. Says Rebbe, Nidashen Hashemen Nidashna Hapsila. Now the word Nidashen literally means to clear off the ashes. I have a very cute story about that, but not for now. Anyway. So not only, says Rebbe, do we have to clean out the ashes that were a result of the oil burning up, but also the psila, the wicks themselves. So Ketzadose, Meitiva, right? This is called Hatovas Haner, which is usually done in the morning, but now it's done in the middle of the night when the sirens went off. And Miloshan Hatova, to do something to improve. And that's called cleaning it out. So he cleans out all the ashes and nosim bo shemen madlika. Right? So now he's going to put shemen and he's going to light the candle. I was wondering whether we would make a brach on this. And I think the answer to that question depends upon the Gemara's next suffix. Because Yosef Rab Ziko Komi Boile Rab Zurika had a suffix. Shu nosim bo shemen kemida rishona o kemoshe chasra. Meaning, let's say it's 3 a.m. and daybreak is at 6, and let's say they lit it at 12 midnight. So if it went out at 3, then all you need is half of the oil, which would be half of a chatzi lug, a quarter of a lug, to carry you through the morning. That's one side. And that's called Kemoshe Chasra. The other side is to say, no, Kimida Rishona. You got to put in the full chatzi lug and start from scratch, which means that it's going to last longer than all the other lamps, all the other candles. Are you following the Gemara's suffix? Basically, the Gemara is asking, I hate to use this pun, but did you blow it? You blew it, and now you got to start from scratch, or no? Whatever you did, you did. There's an ongoing mitzvah every second. There's a separate mitzvah, and you accomplished half the mitzvah. Now you have to do the other half. And I think the nafkamina would be whether or not you make a bracha. Okay, fine. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, after the suffix of Rebbe was clarified, and then Rabbi Zrika came up and he had his own suffix. So Rebbe was clear that you have to do Dishon on both the Shemen and the Psila, and now you do Hatava, and you have to replace it with Shemen and Psila. Now Rabbi Zrika comes up and he says, well, how much do you have to put in? How much oil? Rabbi Yirmiyah Pshita de Kavida Rishona. In my mind, there's no suffix. It's absolutely clear that he has to start from scratch. Why? De'i Kimoshe Chasra. If we're going to go with the other tzad in Rab Zrika's suffix, that all you have to do is be mashal, and you have to make up for what was missing, is minoya din and my chisar. How's he going to know what amount of oil was used up? What he's going to have to do is he's going to have to measure the oil that's left, that wasn't consumed, and calculate by subtracting that from the chatzi log how much was already consumed and how much does he still need. So maybe we'll actually calculate that and measure it out. Im kain sheva midos, nafish lumidas tuva. We have to create new measures to measure out these amounts, because it's no longer the set amount of a chatzi lug or a revius halug, etc. Now, when Rabbi Yirmiyah made this statement and resolved the suffix of Rabbi Zrika got very excited, and Kari Alai quoted a pasuk. This is the style that we're seeing over and over again. And now he's going to quote Tehillim, and it says in Tehillim, "Va'adarcha tzlach rechav al dvar emes va'novat tzedek." Right, with your splendor, succeed and ride for the sake of truth and righteous humility. Again, what you have to know here is a Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Samach Gimel, that the word V'adorecha is read as V'chidudecha. Okay, we're not going to get into that. That's a whole discussion about how in Drush you could darshan a Hey as a Ches and a Reish as a Dalid. Anyway, the bottom line is that Rab Zrika was telling Rab Yirmiyah that due to your chidudim means your sharp intellect, you've succeeded in offering a true and correct answer. Itmar Nami, we're going to support Rabbi Yirmiyah's conclusion with a statement of Amar Rebbe Avo, Amar Rebbe Yochanan, Amar the other say was is Ner Shekovsa, Nidashen Hashem Nidashen Apsila Ketzed Osa Meitiva Menosim Boshem Kemido Rishona Umadlika. Explicit that you go back to square one and you fill up the lamp now with the oil that you needed from the get-go. Okay. Now, the Gemara is high tide here for the menorah and wants to know how do you clean out the menorah on a daily basis? Because the Gemara assumes that in order to clean out the lamp, you have to tip the lamp over. Omer of Huna bereid Rabbi Yehuda of Sheshes, Ner Shavimigdash Shel Prakim Hava. Yeah, I'm thinking of the toys we used to give our kids to play with. They were made of different, attached parts, that were flexible. You could bend them over. So the ner, meaning the lamp itself, not the rest of the menorah, the body of the menorah was made of pure gold, a kikar zav. But according to the statement here of Sheshes, the lamps on the top of the menorah, each one of the seven lamps, were added parts that could be bent. And that's how they would clean it up. But now we have to go back to the Torah and fit this into the words of the Torah. Kosover of Sheshes holds, Kiksiv Kikar u Miksha. Kikar was the amount of gold that was needed, right? A block of gold, which was equal to 3,000 shkolim and whatever. Anyway, it had to be miksha. Miksha means Rashi. It's interesting. Rashi uses the German word in Chumash to interpret miksha as gehammert. It had to be hammered out. So it was this gigantic piece of gold that had to be hammered out. And now we're going to say that what was hammered out a menorah v'neroseh ksiv, so that you would hammer out the entire menorah, including not only the structure, the basic structure of the menorah, but also the lamps. So therefore, the lamps that were hammered out of the kikar zav could not be moved. So that's why Rav Sheshes says that keva de vidoy hatava, since you need to clean them out, and for that you need to bend them, ilav de prokim havi, if it wasn't that they added these flexible parts to allow you to bend them, then lo havi metivale, he couldn't possibly clean out the lamps. So it had to be that the lamps had like an added section when they were hammered out that was flexible. If the lamps could not be bent downwards, it would be impossible to clean them properly. So you had to figure out a way that although the lamps were not removable because they were made out of the kikar zav, together with the rest of the menorah, but nevertheless, they had to find a way of bending it downward through these flexible parts. Otherwise, they couldn't do hatava. They couldn't clean it out. Now, the premise here is that the reason why they had to add these prakim to make it flexible is because the kikar was used to make not only the body of the menorah with all its branches, but also the lamps. Meisvei, well, the Brisa says, Ketzed Osa, how did they clean up the lamps? Well, how was that Tava implemented? Misalkon umenichon bioel. Right? He took the lamps out, brought them into the Heichal, umekancham besfog, you wipe them with a sponge, v'nosim bem shemen umadlika. So obviously you see that the lamps could be removed from the menorah. There was no need for these prakim to facilitate the bending of the lamps. They could even remove the lamps, and that's exactly what they did. So if Sheshes is now his back against the wall, the only possible way out of this problem is to say it's a machlokas tanoim. Hu dioriki hai Tana, because Rav Sheshes holds like a different opinion of a Tana. The Sanya will into the Brisa, Chachomim Omrim lo hoyim mezizin osomim koma. There was no way that they could remove the lamps from its place. These are the Chacham who disagree with the opinion that was mentioned in the Resha of this Brisa that we just said, that Misal could have been Ichem Ba'oil. No, it was impossible. Michlal di boile lo zuze motzi mozizle. The Gemara says the following, that from the fact that the Brisa uses the term lo hoyu mezizin, as if to say they wouldn't remove it, it implies that they could have removed it. Ela ema, therefore we have to rewrite the text of the Brisa. Ema lo hoisa zazavim koma. It, meaning the lamp, could not be removed from its place. In any event, this Chachamim in the Brisa supports Rav Sheshes, who says that when they made the menorah out of a mixture of kikar zav, even the lamps were made out of that same kikar, and therefore they had to add these prakim in order to facilitate the bending of the lamps. Uman Chachamim, and by the way, if you want to know who is, the general term Chachamim here in the Sefer of the Brisa, Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, Tesanya, we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok Omer, Kimin Tashel Zov Hoyel al Gaba, right? They flattened out a piece of gold and put it on top of the lamps in order to guarantee that the oil inside the lamps would not become filthy from different things that float through the air. Shumetiva, when it's time to clean out the lamp, dochako klape pia, right? He had to push the golden plate that covered the lamp towards its mouth. Ksenosim bo shemen dochako klape rosha. Anyway, you see clearly that the lamp itself was never removed. It couldn't be removed. And that's going to support the view of the previous brisa of the Chachamim and identify those Chachamim as Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok. And now the Gemara says that this issue as to whether or not the lamps were part of the body of gold of the menorah or not, whether they could be removed, is bepluked to Tahani Tanoi, decided this is machlokas in a brisa of two Tanoim, menorah v'nei rosev bos min hakikar. According to the first opinion in this brisa, not only was the menorah hammered out from the kikar zav, but the neros, the lamps, were also likewise hammered out. The only things that were left out and were separate entities made from a different kind of gold, as we'll see, was malkocheha machtoseha minakikar. Ein minakikar. The tongs were used to remove the old wicks from the oil and set new wicks in its place. And then we have the machtosel, the scoops that we use to remove the ashes from each lamp every morning. So that's the opinion of Tanakama, that both the menorah and the neros were hammered out from the kikar zav. However, Rabbi Nechemia Omer disagrees. Menorah haisa ba min hakikar, but velo neros seha, and certainly not milkochem min hakikar. So the neros were hammered out of a different piece of gold, therefore they were removable. The machlokas here, as to whether the neros were part of the original hammered out kikar, depends on how you interpret the psukim. Bahai Kra. The pasuk says, the Sanya, kikar zav tahor yasa osa. Lamanu liminora sheba min hakikar. Okay, so far, osa refers to the kikar, to the menorah itself, and that was hammered out from the kikar. Minayin l'rabos neros seha. So this Tana holds that even the neros were hammered out from the kikar. Talmud Lomar, es kol hakelim ha'il, is a ribui of kol hakelim to include even the neros. Yochel animar, but maybe I should go to the extreme, and therefore through this ribui of kol hakelim, I should include even the malkochem machtoseha, the scoops and the tongs. Talmud Lomar, Pasuk says osa. Remember, we had that miut osa, and the osa now is after we have the ribui of kol hakelim, which we were marbe the neros. Now we have the miut of osa to exclude malkochel matosel. That's Rabbi Nechemia. Frek the Gemara, the kasha de Rabbi Nechemia, the Rabbi Nechemia. Now you have a steer between two statements of Rabbi Nechemia, because in the brisa that we quoted earlier, Rabbi Nechemia says that the neros did not come from the kikar. Here it says that the neros were created from the kikar. Trei tanoia libe the Rabbi Nechemia. There was a machlokas tanoim as to what was the precise and correct transmission of Rabbi Nechemia. Now the brisa continues. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Omer Minora ba min hakikar v'ein malkochel machtosev v'nerosev bos min hakikar. So now Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha holds that the ribui of kol kelim is not relevant to malkochel machtosev, as we said before. And yet, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha doesn't seem to need a ribui to include. I'm sorry. That osa is a miut to exclude even the neros. Is elamani mekaymes kol kelim. So what do we do with the ribui? Because according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, even the neros were not hammered out of the kikar. And the answer is shahayu kelim shel zav. There are two types of gold. There's the gold. Okay, I'm anticipating again what's coming around the bend. Let's just read the Gemara first. Zav behedjik sivbei. I mean, the Torah says that the neros are made out of gold. Asisas neroseh shiva vehelos neroseh veheral zav tar. So the Torah says explicitly that number one, the neros. Number two, the malkacheha. And number three, the machtosel. They were all made of gold. So now you're telling me that kol hakelim eila means that there was a separate gold for all these kelim. We know that these kelim were made out of gold. Lo nitzchal lepi neros. So the pasuk of kol kelim, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, is coming to tell us that the mouth of the lamp. Now keep in mind, the mouth of the lamp is the part that constantly becomes filthied, by the burning, the burning fire and the burning psila. Salkadait Kamina, I wouldn't have thought that the Torah would require to use gold for the pi haneros, because pi haneros ashchure mashchir, they always become blackened by all the soot and the afer, the ashes and the burnt wicks. And a Torah chasam b'modim shel Yisrael, they have to be replaced constantly. And that's going to cost us a bomb of money because it's made out of gold. And therefore we have a havamim, if not for the pasuk of es kol kelim, is liavid zav koldehu. Maybe all we need is the lowest quality of gold that has not yet been refined, kamash malan. Therefore, I need the ribui of kol kelim to teach me that although these kelim, the neros, etc., were made of separate pieces of gold, but you need refined gold. And you can't get away with cheaper gold.